chapter 18 sees the plan for destruction being put into place, but also some spiritual engagements. For example, an unexpected encounter between Abraham and the Lord begins with this verse. It is very different from God's appearance to Abraham in the previous chapter. This time, Abraham may not even be aware at first that one of the three men standing near his tent is the Lord in human form. Apparently, the early events occur not long after Genesis chapter 18. In Genesis chapter 17 verse 21, God said Sarah would give birth 1 year later. And at this time she was not yet pregnant, so this couldn't be more than 3 months after the events in Genesis 17. Ere again, the Lord came to Abraham in human appearance. This is another presentation of Jesus in human form before his incarnation. Here among the three men visiting Abraham, we do not know if Abraham knew the identity of the visitors, but he gracious in hosting them as he bowed to them as his superior. Later, we will see how important feet washing was during this period. And here, Abraham urges them to rest under the shade of the tree, to have some water, and have their feet washed. Foot washing was not only a sign of politeness and respect, but also of hospitality. Depending on who did the actual washing, usually a servant, it could also carry a sense of submission. The more that I study Abraham, the more I really truly enjoy the man's character. Although he is flawed like each of us, he was truly a man of character and integrity. For example, after asking them to receive rest and water, and the washing of their feet in the previous verse, Abraham now includes the offer of a morsel of bread before they pass on. As the following verses will reveal, Abraham is vastly understating the meal he plans to provide. Abraham, a wealthy and powerful man with many servants, refers to himself as the servant of these men. Indeed, he acts as if he were a servant eager to please his master. But notice how urgent Abraham was in his actions, so maybe he knew there was something truly special about these visitors. Without question, hospitality should be common in our actions. And it was during this period in time. But it seems like Abraham knew a little bit more about these visitors. However, some scholars suggest Abraham may not have known yet that this stranger was actually the Lord. According to this view, Abraham was merely exhibiting the qualities of a generous and kind-hearted host. Based on the description of these events from Scripture, it appears that Abraham and Sarah would make this meal themselves. Starting here, in verse 9, Abraham's visitors have finished the meal and begin to reveal the purpose of their visit. Their first question shows they know more about Abraham than they have let on. They know of his wife Sarah, and they ask where she is. Abraham replies that Sarah is in the tent. We will soon learn that she is listening intently to this interaction. Here, God speaks to Abraham about Sarah with the full knowledge that she is listening. The Lord repeats what he has said to Abraham in the previous chapter. This time, though, he speaks in a way that Sarah will be sure to hear. God announces, and Sarah clearly hears, that she will have a son by this time next year, when the Lord plans a return visit. Note, this promise of regeneration was specifically made to Abraham. Sarah also was miraculously regenerated, but this promise was to Abraham. It seems that God dramatically repeated this promise to Abraham in a relatively short time. At first, this must have sounded ridiculous to Abraham and Sarah, as both were past middle age. And while they did live long lives, it would appear that she was well past childbearing age, but God makes all things possible. He has told Abram, now Abraham, that regeneration will occur. And if God gives a promise, he will see it come to fruition. But this seems to be the first time Sarah hears of the promise, so Abraham probably had not told her of the promise. Sarah's initial reaction will be similar to Abraham's. Given her lifelong barrenness and advanced age, she will laugh at the suggestion of having a natural-born child. Even though she laughed within herself, God knows and hears all. Notice that God knew about Sarah laughing, but He did not take away the promise. He will deal with her unbelief, but not take away the promise. This situation is one more illustration that there is nothing too hard for God. Our God is much bigger than any problem we have. Given the long lifespans of early mankind, it stands to reason that people of Abraham's era continued to have children later than they do today. At the same time, the text spells out that they were definitely considered old. Like God does, He asked a rhetorical question of Abraham and Sarah, demanding a one-word answer, and anything but no is the wrong answer, then and now. God is calling Sarah and Abraham to believe that He would do a seemingly impossible thing for them. God dealt with Abraham about this, not Sarah herself. Because Abraham was the head of his home, God promised that it would happen, and at the appointed time. Now the three men return to their mysterious journey. As a good host seeing his guests off, Abraham walks with them for some distance. And this is probably the beginning of southern hospitality. God asked Himself a question. But He didn't do this because He didn't know what to do, or needed to process His thinking, but He was thinking to us, the readers of Genesis. He was letting Abraham know what was about to transpire. When we read that the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah was great, we can probably assume it was from many sources. Again, we see God going down to check something about, but He already knows the answer. But He is demonstrating something to His people, including His knowledge and integrity. Abraham knows about the reputation of the city, and Abraham's nephew Lot and his family also live in the city, among the people. Abraham is concerned that Lot will suffer the same fate as the rest of the city if the Lord chooses to take action against them. This seems to be his motivation for asking God to spare the city. Now Abraham gets more specific. What if 50 righteous people lived in Sodom? Would God not spare the place for the sake of those 50 people? God said this because Abraham asked. When Abraham drew near to the Lord and prayed according to God's revealed nature and will, God agreed. The Lord said that He would spare the city if there were 50 righteous there. Abraham continued his intercession with a bold humility. He was not proud or arrogant before the Lord, yet he still continued to ask. Abraham asks God for help, but nowhere, at any time, does he demand anything from God. Rather, he is simply interceding on the behalf of the city. Eventually, they agreed on 10, which should be looked at as God bringing out a good heart in Abraham. Unfortunately, there were not 10 righteous people in the city, only 4. And surely God knew how many righteous people there actually were in the cities. Yet God specifically revealed the fate of these cities to Abraham. More so, there is always a bigger lesson to learn, as the point of this is not that God needs to have His mind changed. Rather, the purpose for this conversation is to prove, in no uncertain terms, that God's approach to these wicked cities is entirely just.